Let's do this.
Much better. All right. I'm Athen Green from ChristianNeophyte.com, and today we're going to do another book review. So today we're going to do a book review on actually the first book I ever read as an inquirer / catechumen, and that is Becoming Orthodox by Father Peter Gillquist. Now, this book was introduced to me by my sister. Well, Orthodoxy as a whole was introduced to me by my sister. We might even do a video on that. And the book itself really kind of opened my eyes to a lot of misconceptions that I had about the Eastern Orthodox Church. Up until I had read that book, I had really just thought Orthodoxy was weird. You know, I knew I didn't want to become a Catholic, but the East was just too weird looking. So this book really kind of helped me get a little more handle on the historical background of the church, some of the misconceptions on the theology that I had. So I love this book, and it's a favorite of many, so let's jump into the review. Once again, just like I mentioned in the last book review, this book is going to be graded on a 10-star scale. We're going to give 5 stars for the content. I mean, that's the most important piece of the review. 3 stars for readability, 1 star for accessibility, and another star for the quality of the book. So 10 stars, of course, being an A+, 9 stars being an A, 8 stars being a B, kind of like back in school, so going down from there. So without further ado, let's get started. So the book itself is split into 3 different parts. The first part tells this story of this journey of this group of people, really leaders of a movement back in the day called Campus Crusade for Christ, where they would basically go to these college campuses, do evangelism and outreach, and kind of really share the gospel with these kids. And they would form these local groups of Bible studies for these universities, and it had a really big impact across the country. They had multiple chapters throughout the country. So the first part is kind of the story of how that began, and then a story of how they kind of felt like it wasn't fulfilling to the kids. You know, the kids would get saved, and then what? You know, they didn't want these little Bible studies to turn into a church. That wasn't their intention. So they were concerned about what happens after that decision for Christ is made. And that kind of turned into this search for something deeper. They go into looking into the early church, the Church of Acts, or the New Testament church as it's often referred to, and the search began. So that's part 1. The second part is really a few theological chapters about some of the things that they discovered about what the early church believed, specifically what the Orthodox churches believe. So it goes into things about Mary. They talk about the sign of the cross. They talk about the T word, tradition. So chapter 2 is fairly short, but it has a lot of good theological content in it. Part 3 actually kind of continues with how part 1 feels. Part 3 talks about, now that they discover the Orthodox Church, what did that journey look like for that group of people into the Orthodox Church? In fact, it chronicles their journey all the way to Constantinople and Antioch to talk with the patriarchs themselves about how they should bring this group, which had grown into a church at this point, called the Evangelical Orthodox Church, not affiliated with the Orthodox Church, but that was the direction they were going. And they traveled to the East to really talk with the patriarchs about how to bring this church into communion with the Orthodox Church. And it's quite an amazing story. So as far as content goes, it has a lot of good content, theological. It has content about this journey, and the history of the church, and it's really it's good content for an inquirer or somebody who is interested in what the Orthodox Church is all about, especially for evangelicals, since that is the direction that Father Peter Gillquist and his group came from. It's really good content for evangelical inquirers. However, parts 1 and 3 really read differently. It's a journey story. It's an autobiography about this group and how they reached orthodoxy, and it's really good content. But parts 1 and 3 really read differently than part 2. Now, part 2, it almost feels like they can be two separate books. You have part 1 and 3 can be one book. Part 2 could be another book. Maybe if they just added a couple more topics on the theological side, it could have been its own book. So really, in a way, when you finish this book, it almost feels like you read two different books, which is fine. It's still a lot of content cram packed into this book. But it kind of felt disjointed. You kind of get jerked around a little bit, going back and forth between these genres of literature. Another great piece of content that is easily overlooked by many Orthodox, because evangelicals just don't see this, is there is actually a map in the book of history. It shows when the other groups broke off. So when the Roman Catholic Church broke off, when the Protestant churches broke off of that branch. So it kind of gives a little bit of a timeline, so you can put Eastern Orthodoxy into a historical context. Some would argue that, well, this is just the view from the Orthodox. The Roman Catholics would say that the Orthodox broke off of them, and that would be probably a topic for a whole nother video. But this map in the book can be very insightful, kind of give a little bit of a historical perspective on Eastern Orthodoxy for the inquirer. Now, because of these things, I'm going to be giving this book 3 out of 5 stars for the content. Again, just because it feels a little disjointed, could be two different books, but the content's still great. The content's still there. Now, the readability of this book is phenomenal. The language is super simple. It's only 180 pages, so I mean, you could sit down and read this in a day or two if you really just wanted to jam through it. Very, very easy book to read. The other thing that makes it very readable is the chapters themselves are short. I mean, the book is broken into 3 parts. The chapters within each part are fairly short, and even within the chapters there's like these subcategories, these chapters, the little titles. So even if you wanted to read this book in little tiny bite-sized chunks, you could. Another thing that makes this book very readable, something I always look at books, is the font. Sometimes when the font is really small, it can kind of be tough on your eyes, but it's a good font. It makes it very easy to read. So for that, the book is getting a full 3 stars for its readability. Moving on to the quality of the book, Ancient Faith Publishing has done a really great job, especially recently, of the quality of their books. But this is the newest edition, and they did a really great job with it. The cover is glossy. The pages themselves are that bright white, stocky page, so very easy to handle and turn. It's not grainy like some of the older books published by them. And like I said before, the font in this book is a good size. And the binding so far has held up, so it's pretty good binding. I've been through this particular book a few times, and the binding there's no issues with the binding whatsoever. So this will be getting a full star for quality. Now, moving on to accessibility and price. The book is easily available and still in stock in the majority of places. You can even get it on Barnes & Noble, local bookstore, online. The book is still available on Amazon, plenty in stock, for $16.95, and I will put a link in the description below. It'll take you right to that book, really easy to grab. There's also a Kindle edition for $9.99 on Amazon if that's what you like to do. And if you go to audible.com, again, this video is not sponsored by Audible. One day maybe we'll get there, but audible.com, the Audible book is available on there, read in the voice of the author, which I think always adds a nice little touch to it. You always get the little nuances in their voice when they're reading what they wrote. So that is also available. So for accessibility and price, I'm giving this its full star. It's not expensive, easy to get a hold of. So who do I recommend this book to? I recommend this book to both Inquirers and Catechumen. It has a lot of great material, as we already discussed. Has very profound yet simple concepts for Protestants and Catholics alike. I recommend this book for any inquirer or catechumen wanting to learn a little bit more about the journey, and maybe even just examine their own journey. They'll probably find a lot of similarities between this group that converted to Orthodoxy and themselves. Question of the day is, what was the first Orthodox book that you read, if you've read one? I'd like to know in the comments below what books you would like me to look at for review on this channel. And until next time, make sure you run that race with endurance. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.